The Wealthy Life is brought to you by investment dealer Raymond James. Life well planned. See what a Raymond James advisor can do for you.
With us today is Richard Bell, a lawyer with experience in wills and estate planning. Richard, welcome to the show today.
Thank you very much, Sybil.
Tell me a little bit about your background.
Well, I actually started my career in marketing research. My family had always thought I would become a lawyer. Needless to say, you reject what your family is advising you to do. So I went into marketing research. And as it turned out, one of my colleagues in the field of research, her husband was a lawyer. And so he met with me, we met socially, and then at one point he said, you know, Richard, you really should go just write the exam. Write the exam. Wrote the exam, the rest is history. I've been practicing now for almost 30 years.
Wow, so you listen to your friend, not your parents.
Exactly. I think most children are like that.
But you got to try things on your own first.
Exactly.
I get it. So you specialize, or not specialize, but do a lot of work with wills and estate planning.
That's a big part of my practice.
Do many people have wills?
Yeah, we've actually done some research with our clients, and as it turns out, only about 50% of the adult population have wills. And it gets a little worse when you look at some of the other documents, but that's really the key. Half the population does not have wills, and they certainly should.
So what happens if you die without a will?
Well, Sybil, the government decides who's going to get what, and in many instances, that's not what you would want. Plus, there's some really sort of sad stories that can result, and we see these in my practice. One of the real sad ones was a young couple, a young child. Husband, unfortunately, got diagnosed with a fairly aggressive form of cancer. The wife, and he wanted to get a will done. The wife said, no, we're going to beat this, which is understandable.
Oh, no.
The sad result, though, is he passed away without a will, and there was a young child. So now the surviving spouse has to deal with the public guardian and trustee, because a portion of the estate now has to be held in trust for the minor child.
Oh, dear.
So certainly not the result you would want to see. Other situations where both parents pass away, you could have a child getting control of millions of dollars at the age of 19.
Oh, so and that most parents would say that's probably not a good idea, especially when the child at 19, if you lose both your parents, you don't even know where to turn. You're grieving, you're mourning. You haven't had life experience in managing money. It's a scary thing.
And you know, the concern around this too is if mom and dad owned a piece of real estate in Victoria or Vancouver, we may be talking about millions of dollars. So a 19-year-old child inheriting a significant amount of money, you worry about what is that path for that child in the future. Yes. Perhaps lots of good times, lots of new friends, but perhaps the wrong path.
And who's really your friends? Because all of a sudden you've got millions of dollars. People pop out of the woodwork for that.
So those are just a couple of examples of where things go really wrong. And you know, you may not want to share your estate with your siblings if both you and your spouse pass away. And you clearly want to make sure there's trust provisions for children. When I first started practicing, we'd create trusts for children. They would have access to one half of the funds at 19, the other half at 25. Given the amount of wealth that's out there now, we've moved that to 25 and 30 and perhaps even to 35, because we know most kids aren't getting married till they're in their 30s, starting families late. So it really is a different time from
a planning perspective, and you want to think of these things. You know, I don't understand it. We all die. We know we're going to die. So
that's right.
You need to have a will. Everybody should have a will, unless you want somebody else to take control of what happens. Now, some people say they just don't care. I'm dead, who cares? Somebody else can worry about it.
Yeah, I often say to clients, it isn't about you. It's about your family, your loved ones. They are going to go through a tremendous time of stress when you do pass away. Fortunately, they cared about you, and therefore the stress will be there. So really think about them. And it was interesting, the other piece of information that came from our research is the #1 reason for people not getting their wills done.
What is that?
Procrastination.
Really? It's that simple. It's just they put it off.
And unfortunately, men are worse than women.
Okay, my husband's like that. He says, I don't want to talk about it. Just do what needs to be done.
Whenever I have a couple in, I ignore the man and I talk to the wife.
Yes.
And she's the one who takes responsibility for ensuring this is done.
So what you're saying is you want something done, give it to a woman to do?
I'm not quite there yet, but I'm very close when it comes to certain things. Yeah, no, it is just absolutely so critical, and people don't understand the impact of not having a will, both as we were just talking about in terms of the emotional impact, but also the distribution certainly, in most instances, will not end up what you would want to have, particularly in a family situation. Similarly, let's say you have a disabled child.
Yes.
And you haven't done a will.
Yes.
And that disabled child's receiving benefits. There's a potential that the child will lose their benefits if the parents have passed away. So again, every will should plan for some potential beneficiary to be disabled. We had a situation where mom's will said, so she did a will,
yes,
give to my son. If my son predeceases, give to my grandchildren. Son had predeceased, grandchild was disabled. Oh. So her disability benefits were at risk.
Right, and so that all has to come into play. What are some of the things that should be included in a will? And how do you deal with situations where you don't want to distribute it evenly to all family members?
Yeah, there are scenarios where you may have the black sheep in the family.
Yes.
And there's what's called wills variation provisions in our legislation, where the concept is to treat your children and spouse fairly. So there are some mechanisms where you truly have that black sheep, where you are concerned perhaps about drug abuse, for example.
Yes.
So there are a couple of scenarios, a couple of structures that you can deal with to avoid the wills variation. And that's a bit more complex, so all I suggest to folks is that make sure you talk to a professional advisor who really spends a lot of their time in this area of the practice. It's not simple. There's complex issues, and it's really, the question is, what if this situation arises? And then if that situation doesn't happen, what about this other situation? I call it the what ifs.
Well, and I know just doing a will is all about making sure that your wishes are on paper and followed through. It really does make it easy for the rest of the family to deal with. But all of those what if scenarios can cause things to go different ways. Yeah. And they may be in conflict with one another, so you need to make sure you have both an accounting and a legal opinion to look at everything involved.
One of the other ones is that as for those people that have done their wills, they do need to review them. Yes. One of my favorite times is dealing with an older couple, and I always ask the question, well, is your daughter-in-law in the will if something happens to your son?
Yes.
They never seem to be too worried about the son-in-law, but the daughter-in-law is important. Most wills will say, give to my child, if my child predeceases, give to my grandchild.
Yes.
Well, you're sitting there, you're 85 years old, you love your daughter-in-law.
Yes.
You really don't realize that she's not going to inherit anything if
I'm
mom
going to have to talk to my in-laws about that.
Yeah, that's right. It's always the daughter-in-law. As I say, no one seems to be concerned about the son-in-law.
No. Well, Richard, this has been very interesting. And I know as people put their thoughts together in their will, something else that goes with the will is all the other information, like who's the accountant, who's the lawyer, what are your passwords for your computer. So one of the things that we've done is we've put together an estate planning reference guide, and I strongly suggest that people fill these out with all the pertinent information so that they have this with their will. When the time comes, the executor will know where to find everything.
Yeah, that is a big problem, right? It's really important to have that information. I had a father phone me one day. We had done a real estate transaction for his son. Son passed away. Dad phones me. Can you tell me anything about my son? Where does he bank?
Help.
Help, exactly.
Well, this would answer the question.
Exactly.
Richard, thank you so much for being on the show today. It's been great having you here.
My pleasure, Sybil.
When we return, is it a good idea to hire family in your small business? Find out after the break.